Hi everyone and welcome to Dennis Deep Cuts, the 36th installment of this excellent YouTube series. Today we're going to talk about a couple of artists, musicians, bands that kind of radically changed the sound, but they still remain pretty awesome. Let's see what happens. Alright, summer's over in Sweden, fall's upon us, and I'm going to try to do an episode every week now, but I can't really promise because on Tuesday I head over to the States to do a week of touring with Fake Names, and you can find the tour dates maybe down below. And then when I come home, I'm playing shows with Invasion, and then we go on a European tour in October. So I'm quite busy. I've been quite busy the last couple of weeks, but I'm gonna try to do a couple of episodes so you can have some stuff to look at. Today I want to talk about the sort of exciting thing that happens when an artist creates something great and then changes tracks and then creates something great. It's not easy. I think history is full of bands and artists that kind of try to redefine their sound or try to do something different and kind of fell flat on their face. But I want to touch on a couple of examples on people that did it very successfully. Not all of us comes fully formed. There are a couple of bands that kind of like they nailed the formula and then they stuck to it. I'm thinking, of course, of your AC/DCs or your Slayer or maybe my pals in Bad Religion, when they found that thing that defined what they are, and then they just kept fine-tuning it, which is pretty fantastic. There's of course the risk of the law of diminishing returns, but all in all, it's quite spectacular. We can see like something that's very consistent. If there's something that I've never been in my musical output, I've never been consistent. I'm way too restless and I'm way too curious, and I'm one of those people that I just want to try new things. So as someone that loves music, but also as someone that creates a lot of music, I can see both sides when your favorite artist changes direction. I can see why that could be frustrating, but I also can see why you as an artist want to change direction. So today we're going to dig into that. I'm going to talk and think a little bit about why people do what they do and the different parameters that are set in motion on why you want to change your sound. So yeah, let's do it. Let's see what happens. I'm going to talk about 5 artists. So I'm going to show you 10 records. So it'll be 2 records with each artist in different styles. I mean, it's not, a lot of this stuff is not radically different, but it is different enough. And I mean, you have your David Bowies or your Madonnas or even bands like U2 that made a point out of changing their sound. I'm not going to talk about any of these. Like most of my picks are a bit more on the, I wouldn't say obscure side, but more on the alternative side. Let's do it. Let's get into it. So one of the things that can really change a band's sound or output is when a band member leaves, when a pivotal part of an operation exits for different reasons. Sometimes they get fired, sometimes they want to pursue that solo career, or sometimes they just quit, or sometimes they die. And then that forces the band to sort of maybe find a new way forward. I'm going to talk about a really great band that started out as a great punk/hardcore band, and I'm going to talk about a band called Lemonheads. Lemonheads started in 1986 in Boston, and they started as a punk/hardcore band, kind of noisy, really great, and they got signed to a local Boston hardcore label, Tang Records, and in 1987 they put out their first album, Hate Your Friends. And if you know anything about Lemonheads, you know it's Evan Dando, but on the first 3 records there was also a guy called Ben Daly, and Evan and Ben shared vocals, and they sang like almost every other song. and they also switched between guitars and drums and so on. So on the first two and a half records, I would say Lick, their third record, is Ben's already kind of on the way out, and it's weird compilation type of record. But on the first two records, it's two very distinct voices and two approaches to the music. And this record is great. It's a super cool punk rock record in the style of like Husker Du or Replacements or early Soul Asylum. And Ben, a song like Sneaky Village is almost like a full-on hardcore song. And this record is fantastic. But after the third record, Lick, Ben left the band, and there was a reshuffling of the decks. And when Evan Dando signed the Lemonheads to major label, he was kind of like the only guy in the band left. And they released the first major label album, Lovely. And then 1992, I think they released It's a Shame About Ray. From the early days as a hardcore punk band into like this alternative pop band, it's been a big shift. I mean, you can still hear Evan Dano's melodic language that runs through all the records, of course, but the sound is different, the tone is different, the artwork's different. It's called It's a Shame About Ray. There's no Hey Your Friends, there's no violence, there's no punk rock. And I love this record. It's one of my favorite indie pop records. It's my go-to driving car in the summer type of records. And it's just amazing. I love Hate Your Friends. I love Crater. And I love It's a Shame About Ray. Lemonheads became, after Ben left, more or less Evan Dando's solo project with different people in it. And he continued to put out some great records, but, you know, some trouble prevented him from really following up on It's a Shame About Ray. But yeah, he's still around doing Lemonheads. It's cool. And check out these two records. They're both really, really amazing records. So one thing that sometimes happens is that a band starts off with a distinct sound, and then they become successful, and then they change the sound, and then they lose some of the old hardcore fans, and then later on they want to backtrack and get back to, like, you know, the original sound. I mean, I think Metallica is a great example of that, when they started out as like these thrash metal pioneers, and then they became like this almost alternative rock band. And then the last 10, 15 years, they've been trying to backpedal and become this thrash metal band while still maintaining their sort of mainstream success. And they've done it fairly well. I mean, you know, their later records are definitely more reminiscent of, you know, And Justice for All and Master Puppets than they are of Load and Reload. So I think that's kind of cool. But I want to talk about one of my favorite metal bands, and it's a band that I often talk about on this show, and it's of course Boyvod. Boyvod started in Quebec in 1982, and in 1984 they put out their first record, War and Pain. War and Pain is full-on thrash, speed metal, heavy metal, punk rock assault. It bludgeons you over the head with this all-out attack. It's violent. It's kind of fucked up and weird. Boyvod was in love with new wave of British heavy metal. They were into punk rock, and they were into science fiction. And this really weird amalgamation made into some really cool. War and Pain is actually super weird and cool record. It's like a heavy metal, like a fucked up heavy metal record. As they progressed, however, they did a couple of records in this kind of really thrashy style, and their record Killing Technology might be the pinnacle of that. But on Killing Technology, they're already showing signs of the prog rock and psych rock elements that would come to define their second stage of their career, with the Dimension Hattress, they really begin to explore like different fabrics, different time signature, and they became more of a weirdly proggy thrash kind of band. And they put out the great Angel Rat, and then in 1993 they put out The Outer Limits, which is a record that I truly love. And you can hear similarities from War and Pain, especially maybe the singing is a bit similar, but this record is kind of crisp and clean, and it's a weird, I would say kind of poppy, prog metal psychedelia. And I think this record is fantastic. It is the first record that they recorded without their bass player Blackie, who was part of the original members, and it's also the last record with Snake, or Dennis, as the singer. He left shortly after this record, and this is just a fantastic record. It's so rich. There's so much going on, and it has hooks, and it has really cool songs, and I just love Boyvod. And then they did a little bit of that backtracking, because I think this wasn't a super popular record when it came out. I think that a lot of the hardcore fans and the sort of thrash metal crowd wasn't really super into it. So, you know, they started backpedaling a little bit, and the next couple of records that they put out was more a return to like more basic metal and more thrashy stuff. And then they did a couple of records without the original singer, but they had a new bass player that sang. And then 10 years after this record, he returned. And now Boyvod keeps churning out amazing records. The last 3 full-length albums with them have been top of my, best albums of the year list every year. But they managed to do this thing where they take a little bit of the War and Pain sort of Killing Technology style of Boyvod and mix it up a little bit with the psych prog version of Boyvod, and they create something really cool and really unique. A little bit of backpedaling, but all in all, I think that they're one of those bands that managed to reinvent themselves quite a lot and still stay true to their roots. I love Boyvod. One of these days, I would love to do one of those like best to worst of Boyvod, but there's like 3 albums that's only released on CD. Someone out there on the internet, this needs to be redeemed. We need to get those Boyvod records out on vinyl. I will buy them immediately, and then I will make a list of the best to the worst Boyvod records. Yes. So what do you do then when you're an artist that comes almost fully formed out of the gate? Like, how do you progress from that? Very few of us are lucky enough to find our own voice early on. I think most of us that play music for the first 10 years of our existence, we just try to copy other stuff and claim it as our own, which, I mean, it's a good way to go about business. But then there are some artists that just like, they just come out of the gate with their first record and like, here I am, and this is who I'm going to be now for the rest of my career. One of those artists is, of course, PJ Harvey. PJ Harvey left her first band. It wasn't her band, but the first band she was in, Automatic Diamini, in 1991 to form the PJ Harvey Trio. The first 2 records actually like a band. Dry came out in 1992, and it's one of those records where it's like, demented, bluesy, alternative punk music, very guitar-driven. But from the get-go, PJ Harvey's voice and her expression is there. It's like from the first song of this record, it's like, no, this is what PJ Harvey is. She's never been afraid to work with texture, and she's never been afraid to modify her sound. I mean, she's done records that are more just piano-based, and she's done collaborations, and she's had a rich career for the past 30 years that where pretty much everything she's put out has been pretty amazing. but she has changed her sound and her output quite a lot. And in 2011, she put out the amazing record "Let England Shake." That's more rooted, like almost in folk music. I'm saying that as a very broad term. It's a bit more folky in the songwriting. But one of the big changes that I really appreciate is that PJ Harvey 2011 and also up until now talks a lot about politics, about colonialism and imperialism of the United Kingdom. She talks about the conflicts in Afghanistan and the Falklands Islands, and all these topics that maybe as a alternative rock artist, late in your career, maybe people don't want you to become like the political spokesperson. But she's not afraid to push the boundaries, and she's not afraid to challenge us and challenge herself. I picked this record because it's great. I could have picked pretty much any of her record after her third record because they're all kind of different and they're all amazing. And she's one of those artists that's like a true artist, that she has a very distinct voice, but she still managed to reinvent herself, and all the different expressions that she's tried, it's amazing. She had a new record that came out this year. I have only listened to it once. It's on my pile over there. I'm going to listen to it more because I love PJ Harvey. I am one of those suckers that bought all the last couple of years. She put out like all her albums. She put out like demo versions of her album. I'm one of the dudes that bought all those. So I love PJ Harvey. Everything, you can basically pick any record in her career and have that be your starting point into what she is. She's fantastic. One thing that you see happen over and over again is that an artist becomes very successful, and hubris makes it so that you put out a record and like oh, okay, I'm so successful, I can do whatever I want, and then they put out this grand masterpiece and you're like, that's not what we wanted at all. It's quite fascinating when people do that, when they become so full of themselves that they think like anything I'm going to do from here on out, people are going to love it. And then you have people that kind of does that. They kind of use their popularity and experiment and expand, and they're creating something new and different. I'm going to talk about a band now that didn't put out a whole lot of records, but the recording career, I think it's 5 albums, and it's definitely a pretty wild ride. And I'm talking about Talk Talk. Talk Talk first record, The Party's Over, from 1982. He started in London in 1981. They're one of those bands that kind of like got lumped in with the new romantic scene. People like talk about them as like Duran Duran clones, and they actually did tour with Duran Duran. And they are kind of a synth pop band. Very hooky songs, a lot of big choruses. And this record's great. It's kind of like a new wavy synth pop alternative type of record. It has a bunch of great songs on it, like the song Talk Talk, and one of the other singles that they had on the record is a song called Today. It's a great record. And then they just kept making more great records. They put out It's My Life, which was a massive hit, of course. And then they put out the third record, Color of Spring, which was the first record when they're kind of straying away from like the synth pop 80s kind of thing. And then on the fourth album, Spirit of Eden, with the massive success of the third record, Talk Talk went into the studio for like a full year to record a record called Spirit of Eden, when they really just changed direction. And from the sort of like the synth poppy sheen of the 80s on the first record, they created a record that's like free-flowing, organic, jazzy, really sparse. So sparse and so free-flowing that they actually got sued by the record label because it wasn't commercially viable. So they switched to the record label, and then they put out their last record, Laughing Stock. And this is even more free-flowing. It's 6 songs, and they sound like almost sound like landscapes, very sparse, but at the same time there's a lot of stuff going on. It's very organic, and they're one of those bands. I mean, the joke is always like, it's what happened between the notes. But this is a typical example of a band that's like, it's so sparse and there's so much air to it, and it becomes really, really immersive. Like you dive into this record and you put it on, and it's just like, there's this feeling of like you get immersed into the music because it's magical. But it just moves slower. Everything moves slower. Everything is more sparse. I think they had some, critical acclaim with the last 2 records, but not so much, they didn't sell a whole lot of records, because when they did Spirit of Eden, the record before this, they were like, we're not going to tour this record because we can't recreate what we did in the studio, and even more so with this one. After this record, they broke up. Mark Hollis, the singer, put out a solo record that's even more sparse, that's even less music, and it's so wonderful and so beautiful. And then he retired from music. And Talk Talk is one of those bands. It started out as a synth pop 80s pop band, and ended up as a precursor to when we talk about like post rock or something like that. And all their 5 records, they're all great. They're all fantastic. And the first 3 records are really cheap because they sold millions. This one and Spirit of Eden, they're a bit pricey because no one really bought them when they came out. But everything Talk Talk is worth checking out, and it's quite a ride in just a few years. All right. One more band to talk about. One thing that can happen when you change your direction, change your sound, is that out of necessity, you start somewhere because it's the only place they will accept you. And as you learn and as you evolve and as you grow, that place might feel a little bit too small for you, and then you become something different. When I started playing music, or when I wanted to start playing music, the prevailing scene around me was metal, and everyone was like really proficient players, everyone was great, and I wasn't. And I also was a little bit of a freak. And then I discovered punk and hardcore, and it gave me a voice, it gave me a platform, it gave me a space where I felt like, yeah, there's other freaks here, and you don't really need to be a great player. But in my mind, it was also the possibility or the idea that anything is possible. The punk rock for me was just like blowing down all the doors and the roof and everything, just like anything is possible. I can do anything now. And I did, and I still do, and I still want to challenge myself. I still want to push myself. 35 years later, I'm still in love with the idea of punk and hardcore. But as a creative person, as someone that wants to do stuff, anything goes. Anything is exciting. And I want to talk about one of those bands that I think that they started and they became a part of the punk scene out of necessity, almost. But they were always not really punk enough, and they're too weird. And I am talking, of course, about one of my favorite bands, Husker Du. Husker Du started in Minneapolis in 1979. Kind of, I wouldn't say a normal punk band, but kind of like a punk band. And then they discovered hardcore, and they just start playing super fast. And they just go balls out, basically. And it's super impressive. Like, this first record was recorded in 1981. It's a live recording. and it got released in 1982 by New Alliance Records, which is D. Boone and Mike Watt from Minutemen, their label. And it's fast, it's relentless, it's violent, it's noisy, it's chaotic, and I love it. I think it's just fantastic. There's definitely some flaws in the sound department, but you know, the sheer amount of energy that this record puts out, it doesn't really matter. And then everything moves at a breakneck speed with Husker Du. Like I think in 4 years they released 6 records. One of them being Double Nickels on the Dime, which is probably the first double album punk rock double album ever. And they kept creating great records. They got signed to SST Records, which is, of course, Greg Ginn from Black Flag's label. And they put out Flip Your Wig and New Day Rising. And somewhere along the line, they became great players. They became great songwriters. And they're one of those bands that just kind of like, just by being who they were, they transcended punk and hardcore. And they're just like, we're just this band now that sometimes we play kind of fast and kind of noisy, and sometimes we do this really cool, amazing pop songs. And that's kind of what they became. And then they're one of the first hardcore bands that signed to a major label, and it was a big controversy. And in 1986, they put out their major label debut, Candy Apple Grey. There are remnants of early Husker Du still. There's a lot of energy, but the production is kind of clean and crisp. There's a lot of poppy, like alternative rock songs. And I love this record. There's so many great songs on it, and it's such a, I mean, Land Speed record and Metal Circus and some of the early stuff is just, it sounds like it's a band that's been playing for 20 years, but it's in a span of like 4 years. Husker Du went on to record one more record after this, another double album, Warehouse Songs and Stories. It's fine, but it's a double album, so there's a lot on it to unpack. But in my world, it's wild to be a great punk band, an awesome hardcore band, and a fantastic indie rock band in the span of just a couple of years. It's fantastic, and that's still what we talk about Husker Du today. Yeah. And I love that idea when I wish that punk and hardcore could be more open to the idea that we as musicians, we need to grow, we need to do stuff. And we need to go where music takes us. And sometimes those decisions aren't always easy. And sometimes those decisions kind of goes against people's expectations and what people want from you. And I mean, I was one of those guys, like with Shape of Punk to Come kind of blowing up in '98, being successful, I started Noise Conspiracy. It was very, very different, but in my mind, I'm like, I need to go 2 steps back to be able to move a step forward. And I've always been fascinated, interested in the expression of art, the artistic expression of music. I haven't really been too worried about what people think about me and in my career choices. And at the end of the day, too, whenever you start thinking about music as a career, yeah, I don't know, man. I never thought of it that I was lucky enough to fall into this, and then I just kept doing it, and I've been lucky enough that sometimes people pay attention, sometimes they don't. I don't really care, you know. Like, I would love it if Invasion became massive, but if we don't, yeah, we're still going to put out Invasion records, and you know, that's just how I do it. That's what I love to do. Yeah, the fine balance between like being a fan of music and being a musician. But yeah, 5 examples of great records in different styles with the same artist or band. What's your favorite artist that radically changed the sound but still just remained awesome? Let me know in the comments, and Hopefully I'll see you next week, or maybe I'll see you on tour with Fake Names. Until then, stay wild, my friends. Bye-bye.